Whenever I read or hear the gospel story we heard this morning, my mind goes back to a time and place when Jesus' words to Jairus, the grieving father, "Do not fear, only believe," took on a new and a powerful meaning for me. I once knew a family whose oldest son had been born with a birth defect. Now, it wasn't life-threatening, but it was serious. The boy had undergone numerous surgeries almost from the time of his birth, and all to no avail. Finally, his doctor decided to send him to Houston, Texas, a long way from their home in Illinois, where some doctors had devised a new and a radical treatment which promised to correct his problem. The evening before leaving for Texas, the family had invited a few friends over to their home for a special celebration of the Holy Eucharist and anointing of their son. Their pastor, Father Tom, celebrated the Eucharist on a simple table in their living room with family and friends gathered around. The gospel he proclaimed was the one that we just read this morning, though it seems to me that it may have been a different version or translation, because Jesus' words to Jairus, as I recall them, were, "Fear is useless, faith is what is necessary." Regardless of whether we render it, "Do not fear, only believe," or "Fear is useless, faith is necessary," the meaning of Jesus' words to the shocked and grieving father remain the same. Now, fear in itself is a normal human emotion and can be good and a useful thing. Fear can alert us to real dangers to ourselves and others, and thereby help keep us safe from possible injury or worse. Reasonable, sensible, and prudent fear keeps us from engaging in activities which might cause us harm, physically, emotionally, psychologically, and in many other ways too. A healthy fear will keep me from dashing out in the middle of a busy road. It is a fear which we instill in our children from the time they are very young. Don't play with matches. Don't eat unknown berries, regardless of how pretty they may be. And look both ways before you cross the street. It seems to me that at its base, fear has to do with avoiding a loss. The loss of life, health, relationship, career, reputation, property, and I'm sure much more. Sometimes one fear outweighs another. In our gospel this morning, Jairus, who Mark tells us was a respected leader of the synagogue, came to Jesus because he was afraid of losing his little girl. In so doing, he may have been putting at risk his own reputation and standing in the Jewish community. Some in his community might well have asked why this respected and established religious leader would go to an itinerant preacher whom he had never met. Yet, there it is. Jairus, the respected leader and religious authority in his community, was more afraid of losing his child than he was of losing his reputation or his position. And in that he showed where his true values lay. Fear can be a funny thing. Sometimes, as with Jairus, it can bring about a real sense of clarity about what's really important and what's not. If we want to discover where our real values are, what is really most important to us, all we need to do is to consider what we're really most afraid of losing. As I said, fear can be a funny thing. In some ways, it can be immensely clarifying. Yet in other ways, it can do just the opposite. Fear can cloud our perception of what's a real danger and what's not. Fear can cause us to act out and to speak out in ways that we know are wrong. Fear can drive wedges of suspicion between people and erect walls that keep us from becoming the people that God calls us to be. In short, fear can cause us to see enemies and threats where there are none. Fear can also take away our freedom. by causing unwarranted self-doubt. It can cause us to play it safe and do nothing when real growth or real justice or a real following of Jesus calls for courage and for action. Jesus told Jairus, "Do not fear, only believe," or "Fear is useless, faith is what is necessary." Fear, as we've seen, however, isn't really completely useless. It certainly can have important purposes. It's like any other human emotion. It needs to be soberly evaluated. It needs to be carefully considered. And most importantly for us as Christians, it must be evaluated and held in tension and balance in the light of the gospel. In the middle of Mark's telling of the story of Jairus and his daughter, he inserted the story of a woman with a hemorrhage. Now, Mark tells us that she had suffered for a long time, spent all her money on numerous doctors, and again, all to no avail. Frankly, she was desperate and more than a little afraid. Yet, she had heard of this Jesus of Nazareth fellow, so she approached him with faith and with hope, but also with a good bit of fear all mixed together. But her fear was balanced. It was held in tension, as it were, with her faith and her hope. She approached Jesus not boldly, but very timidly from behind, touching only his cloak. But that was enough. She was healed. And Jesus praised her for her faith, which had overcome her fear. We live in uncertain and often fearful times. There are those who would have us be afraid. Yes, be very afraid. It is in such times as these that we need to be reminded of Jairus, the loving father who put his love over his fear and was rewarded with the life of his daughter. We need reminded of the woman who allowed her faith, trust, and hope to hold her fear in check. We need to be reminded that no good, healthy, and life-giving relationship was ever built on fear. We need also to remember that no great city and no great nation was ever built on a foundation of fear. And most certainly, the one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church of Jesus Christ was not built on fear, but on faith, on hope, on love, and a good bit of courage to boot. Psalm 130, which we prayed this morning, is called the De Profundis in Latin, from its opening words, out of the depth. It is, I think, the perfect prayer for those times when we are afraid, or when we may be tempted to give in to our fears and to allow them to become despair, or to take us in directions we should not go. It begins by acknowledging that we have sunk low. We are in danger of being overwhelmed. We are surrounded. We are surrounded by fear and doubt and sin and division and strife. Yet that fear and all that goes with it is held in check. It is held in tension, and it is overcome by a greater faith in God's mercy, God's forgiveness, and his steadfast love. The only fear we need is the fear and awe of the Lord because of his goodness and his love. We are reminded of his promise that with him there truly is plenteous redemption from all of our sins, all of our brokenness, and all of our fear. Do not fear, only believe. To God be the glory now